Hi everyone, it's Jason Bierko of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest. I like to have him on once a year. He produces probably the most comprehensive report reviewing each year. He's been doing this for how long now, Dave?
You know, I can detect it back to 2007. It got kind of big around 2009. So it started out as a few pages and blew up over the decade to a very large document.
Yeah, you should charge the investment banks like 20 grand for it each. Sell licensing fees like Dennis Gartman.
Well, no one would read it then, so that's kind of a catch-22.
Well, Dave Collum, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. I enjoy these annual look backs, and I'm still unwinding from writing this year in review, so my head's kind of swimming in thoughts. So let's do it.
Okay, so before we talk about investing and markets, let's talk about some of the big political things that happened in 2016. So we had Brexit in June. That was a surprise. We had Donald Trump winning the election and defeating, the chosen one, Hillary Clinton. And then we had the Italian referendum. Why do you think all three of these events are occurring in 2016?
A number of reasons. And this is a stance I've taken for a long time now, that in 2009 we had the financial crisis, and they failed to really fix the system, and the no banker left behind policy, in which no banker went to jail. They really blew it on that one, because it left a global population feeling like they'd been abused and they'd been ripped off, and there was no consequence. And so they really should have had the equivalent of the Pecora Commission that they had in the 30s, where they rounded up the scoundrels and put them in prison. And instead, they stitched up what I call a putrid wound and left it to fester. And so there are those like Strauss and Howe, I think it's Strauss and Howe in The Fourth Turning, who claim that this cycle was inevitable, that the fourth turning is the title of their book, was due. They predicted in 96 that it would come in 2010, so pretty good timing. And I think that those guys would say that we're headed for years of serious cathartic blowout change. And then at the end, you'll hear the birds chirping and the sounds of spring, but along the way, it'll be the winter, the global winter.
Yeah, there's not a World War III, because we know that Hillary Clinton, had she won the election, she was planning, some type of extra war stuff going on too. So hopefully, we can avert potential World War III. Hopefully Trump, Trump's crazy with his Twitter and some of the other stuff he says, but hopefully he means what he says and he won't start a, global scale war.
Well, that was actually my single issue on Trump, and that is that, so I watched him for a long time and found him intriguing. It's for a while I actually found him boring, and then Scott Adams of Dilbert fame converted me, and he wrote a couple of blogs. I said, oh, he's right. I've been looking at Trump wrong. And for me, the final decision to support Trump with a vote, not just hate Hillary, was because I concluded that Trump was not going to be militaristic. I think there'll be a lot of blarney and a lot of vocal garbage, but I think he will cut deals rather than bomb people. I don't think he wants to bomb Syria. I don't think he wants to bomb the Middle East. So for me, that's such a monumental issue that and to me, Hillary, I was convinced, would prove she has the biggest ovaries on the planet and would bomb the hell out of everybody. So it was a kind of an easy decision in the end.
Yeah, I mean, the Clinton Foundation is tied to a lot of the military-industrial complex, so they actually make more profits the more that the wars are started. But I don't think this interview wants to do that. Now, earlier in one of your responses, when I asked you, you talked about the fourth turning with Neil Howe, who I met in person, had lunch with a couple times. You talked about, the throwing people in jail for prosecution. We didn't have that. I've listened to Bill Black talk. The laws are already on the books for financial fraud and crimes and all these other things. And there's a laundry list of crimes that were committed in the 2008, leading up to the 2008 financial crisis. Why do you think the bankers have been able to, evade jail? The guys like John Corzine, who's, one of the worst. Why do you think these guys have been able to not go to prison like they have in the past?
Well, I guess what's that lawsuit? The famous lawsuit where the Supreme Court ruled that money is free speech, which basically opened the floodgates to all forms of bribery on unlimited scales. And there were constraints about what they could and couldn't do, but it really was made possible to give huge amounts of money to anybody. And so with a wall of money showing up inside the Beltway, there's no way that a bad person with wealth and power couldn't get out of almost any crime. And so I think that will turn out to be one of the biggest mistakes the Supreme Court ever made. I've heard rumor from a student of mine who's actually at Harvard Law School right now. He says the word on the street inside Harvard is that they will find a way to undo that. And so I'm optimistic that maybe bribery will no longer be considered free speech. But until then, anyone with money can get out of any crime, pretty much.
Well, Trump is planning on putting more, constitutional judges throughout the different levels of the judiciary branch, including the Supreme Court, more like Judge Antonin Scalia. So hopefully, I like Judge Andrew Napolitano. I think he's exemplary. I think he would be a great selection for the Supreme Court. But we'll have to see. The thing is, Trump wasn't a politician originally, but we'll have to see, because I live right outside of DC, and there's always, hope and change candidates, and they make all these promises, right, to get elected, and then every time they come here, they either give up or they get bought off, or things get diluted to the point where there's no real hope and there's no real change.
Well, so that is, in fact, so in my conclusion section of the year review that I wrote this year, I said, did we need a candidate as extreme as Trump? Was that really necessary? And my answer is a resounding yes. First of all, because someone with his extreme views could not have been elected. Someone so potentially transformational, good or bad, just that transformational, would not have gotten past the blocking game of the two parties if he weren't the most extraordinarily extreme individual as Trump. And so in that sense, I'm kind of hoping maybe that'll hold up, and that maybe when something bad is happening, he'll just say screw it and deal with it in his admittedly at times way. But it'll be refreshing compared to the politics as usual. So when I talk to people who voted for Trump, I am not getting this I voted for Trump because Hillary's evil. They don't contest that point, but I'm getting real enthusiasm from people who admit to voting for Trump. Not just lesser of two evils support. And so we'll see. We could all end up eating it, right? He could be a disaster, but the notion that he's unqualified is ridiculous. We had a junior senator from Illinois run the country for 8 years. How do we do under that one, right? And Trump ran multi-billion-dollar business, right? Building, constructing, doing all sorts of stuff. He's way more qualified than most of the guys who run for the office.
And his cabinet also has the most business experience, I think, of any presidential candidate to come along in modern era. So he's brought in people with business experience. Yes, they don't have, diplomatic experience or government experience, but they have experience, navigating problems in a very difficult, constantly changing global economy. So I am cautiously optimistic that, there probably will be some corruption in the Trump administration, but I am cautiously optimistic that the group of people he has brought in his administration will be able to reduce some of the red tape, cut the taxes, and maybe help out small business to the point where, the small businessman will say, I'm confident enough to make the investments into the United States, to grow a new product or build a new factory, and we can go and hire some full-time employees. Because, when I look at the jobs numbers, I think, almost all the jobs that Obama created in the 8 years under his administration that he's saying are so great, they're almost all part-time jobs.
Yeah, well, so I break with the standard Republican line, which I would say I'm a fairly standard right-winger, but I break with it where this notion that you get to cut taxes and not cut spending, I think is foolishness. And so one of the big questions for me will be, does Trump somehow, can he find a way to shrink government? And when I look at his cabinet And when I look at the various people he's placing in charge of organizations, I do understand why the outside world's looking and saying, my God, this guy's nuts. What's he doing? But if you put it in the context of the notion that that government's bloated, inefficient, profoundly useless in some cases, and therefore one should shrink it, then you say, now, who did Trump assign to run those various organizations within the government? You go, they look like candidates. They look like people who might have what it takes to say, yeah, I can tear down this organization to size if necessary. And so that's why I'm optimistic. If all his appointments shrunk their charges by 20 or 30%, it'd be a bit of a bloodbath at first, but we would finally get the spending under control, maybe.
Oh yeah, I agree. When you cut taxes, you should also cut government spending because, the debt problem is already so big and is pervasive throughout all levels of society in the U.S. that, we run the risk if Trump does do supply side economics with the debt problem already this large, if the real economy doesn't really start to boom again, the debt problem grows too quickly and it accelerates even faster and becomes even more burdensome. So, it could blow up in his face. We could have much worse stagflation in a very short amount of time with these tax cuts if he starts going on crazy spending programs. Do you think that's why the bond market in the last 6 months and the 10-year Treasury, the yields have doubled?
I haven't a clue why the bond market's done what it's done. It's possible that the bond market is just so top heavy, which it certainly is, right? It's the bond market is at 500-year highs. I don't even know what you call it when you have negative interest rates and a huge chunk of sovereign debt. So
you call it an academic theory.
Well, yeah, it's an insane situation. So people were rushing off to buy negative yielding bonds. What's that all about? And so at some point that just turns, and I don't actually need an explanation for why there's a turn any more than I need an explanation for why the San Andreas fault slips or why an avalanche falls. At some point it becomes so top heavy, it's got to go. Then it feeds on itself potentially, and it might be starting. How many times have we thought that was the end of the bond bull market that started in, 81? How many times have we claimed that the bond bull is dead? Bill Gross says it once a month. Gundlach says it. Everyone says it. But it keeps, it's like a vampire, right? You got to put a stake through the heart. Well, one of these days, and only once, it will be the top, right? It'll happen on some fateful moment. Maybe it's in the future. Maybe it's already occurred. I don't know. But I know the top of the bond market, in terms of numbers, is not far away because it's already stupid. It's already insane. You're already getting no confidence. I'm not going to buy a 10-year Treasury over 2% either, right? I'm waiting for 5, 6. Who knows? I'm not here.
Bonds are the one asset class, I would not be buying right now. I don't like really anything in bonds for the most part, especially government bonds, which are more like certificates of confiscation. In the past, like if you're a regular financial student in college, they would teach you that, government bonds are risk-free returns, but now they're return-free risk, as Rick Roll likes to say. Donald Trump is also, I've heard, he spends up to 18 hours a day. He's hardly sleeping. He's on the phone calling wealthy businesses, successful businesses in Japan, China, so many other countries, trying to bring back investment and jobs to the United States. So, he is really working hard. They don't talk about that in the mainstream media much, but that's what I heard he is doing right now, trying to help the economy.
So there's a guy you ought to try to get on named Jesse Felder, who I'm sure you know. And I happened to be listening to a podcast this morning of his, and he noted that, if Trump really does manage to import jobs, since we are not going to pay wages that are comparable to China or Vietnam or whatever, that will be a natural inflation. You won't be buying packs of, free jockey briefs for $8. You'll be paying $25 if they're made locally. And so there could be a big inflation, and boy, that'll blow up any, and maybe that's what the bond market's smelling, right? The looking forward phenomenon everyone talks about. And if they're really smart, the market's really smart, they see the top coming and come earlier, right? And so there's kind of an absurdity to it. But in any case, I think at some point someone's going to, collectively we're going to realize that rates have to go up and that inflation's going to arrive, and And then it's curtains for quite a while, because that bond market's got a long ways to go before it normalizes and then goes to the extreme on the other side. I want positive real returns. So those are a mile away right now.
Yeah, a lot of asset classes are drastically overinflated. Richard Fisher of the Dallas Federal Reserve. I also had Danielle DiMartino Booth on a couple weeks ago. Don't know if you listened to that, but Richard Fisher, when he was there at the Dallas Fed, he was saying how basically, the QE programs boosted asset prices up like crazy. So yeah, I think the asset prices are drastically overvalued. The people on Main Street didn't benefit from a lot of these money printing programs after the 2008 collapse. Unless they had a lot of money in a retirement account, or their home price was reinflated to prior high levels. In terms of the 35-year bull market for bonds, when you go back looking through history, I know you also look through history. 35-year bull markets, Dave, are just unprecedented. You really don't see them. They're not natural, in my opinion. So I don't think we would have had a 35-year bond bull market without massive amounts of government intervention.
Well, so James Grant actually, back in 2014, in one of his interest rate observers, mentioned the previous two bond bull markets. And the bond bull markets can be pretty long as you're willing to ignore the noise, right? As long as you're really willing to look at a very long time scale. But the previous two that he mentions are over the last century and change, century and a half. And as I try to point out that they ended and this one will end too. And my guess is that recency bias after 35 years of a bond bull market, the idea that interest rates could ever go to double digit again is no longer imaginable to anyone but the old men. And so right now that everyone's suffering badly from recency bias. The bond market has been a fantastic source of profits of late, based on the greater fool theory, right? They're not buying the bonds because they're great value. They're buying them because they think they'll be able to sell them for a higher price later, and that's it. And once that fiction is gone, then the bull is over, right?
Well, I agree with you that it's front running, but they're front running the central banks because they know the central banks have been buying them, right? So it's a corrupt scheme where for years the primary dealers at these large Wall Street investment banks, they know that they can for a very quick profit after each treasury auction, they can go buy the treasuries and then flip them to the Fed for fast money. So this is this game. Hedge funds have joined this game as well. They've been doing this for easy money. Routine profits for a very, very long time. But, these things won't last permanently. There's going to be some type of crisis in the near future. I can't tell you exactly what it is. There's a bunch of different potential collapse or trigger points, I think. I've called the analogy an economic minefield. You mentioned a bunch of them in your 2016 review. You talk about the pension fund crisis. We have the European banks that have a problem. We have the emerging markets that have too much dollar-denominated debt, and now they're, despite being over $9 trillion, I think, in dollar-denominated loans globally, there's a dollar liquidity shortage. So, I mean, I could go on and on. We have Japan. There's just so many global problems. In your opinion, how do you think the people in power have been able to keep the plates spinning so long?
I don't really know, because they've been willing to basically throw away historical norms and do things that would make Romans blush, right? They're having sex. They're having sex with all sorts of barnyard animals, and so if you're willing to push it that far, and this notion. I mean, here's a great example. How many articles have you read where they talk about the evils of low inflation? That's idiocy. That's total and utter idiocy. And yet that's what they now believe. So if you're willing to embrace economic theories that are that extreme and that moronic, in my opinion, you can push the thing further than sane people can imagine, right? And so they did. But now they're in this metastable situation. This is like a gigantic house of cards, really picture one, right? A real house of cards. And now they can almost do nothing without risking the thing vibrating and falling down. And so they're terrified when there's a a 10% equity correction that sends them into their bunker of doom, right? And that's just nuts. That means that they've become cowardly. They become captives to their own pathetic models. 10% correction equity scares them. What kind of crap is that, right?
This reminds me, Dave, of going back through history and looking at, medicine from 300-400 years ago, where there was bloodletting and leeches, and, they did all these crazy things to try to, the humors and all those other things to try to heal people, and it ended up making the patient worse and dying faster. So I feel like, the cure, and I'm using air quotes now, is worse than the disease when these guys try to intervene. We have Larry Summers and we have Ken Rogoff, both, going on TV. Larry Summers is talking about the central banks need to start buying stocks in the near future. The Federal Reserve does. They need to get their laws changed. We have Ken Rogoff just coming out with a book and trying to say that anyone who uses cash, $20 bill, $100 bill, is a potential drug dealer or criminal. This is a dystopian society we live in now.
It's starting to me. See, this is what I don't understand. I don't think of Rogoff as an insider. I think of him as just a smart academic who probably has somehow gotten misguided. But I don't think of him. I can look at Summers and say this guy could be talking the book at the Davos crowd. I'm not sure I think of Rogoff in those terms. And so the question is, does he actually believe that? And if he does, then that seems nuts to me. The notion, he said, $10 bills would be fine. Well, $10 doesn't buy you anything. It barely gets you through a drive-through window at McDonald's, right? And so
it gets you one or two items at a grocery store now, yeah.
Right, and 2 boxes of cereal, right? And so then the question is does he really believe that? I don't know. When Summer says it, I know he's talking the book of the global elite, but Rogoff, I was kind of hoping was more grounded. At one point, I actually had an email exchange with him on this point. I told him that the viscerally negative comments on one of his articles was just should be taken as evidence that the people are willing to take all the warts and idiosyncrasies of cash to maintain the personal freedom of cash. And he just said something about, well, I can't do it justice in such a short time frame, so why don't you read my book? And I don't think I'm going to read this book. But
did you listen to the podcast interview that David McAlvany of McAlvany Weekly Commentary and CEO of McAlvany Financial, he did with his co-writer, with Ken Rogoff's co-writer, Reinhart, Carmen Reinhart, a couple months ago? And she admitted that, the long-term strategy is the governments are going to print as much money as necessary, and they're going to pick people's pockets, but do it very discreetly. And she said she was worried for her retirement account. She admitted this. She was being honest. She was worried about the future of her retirement account and the future of her kids and grandkids.
Was this some time ago, this interview? Was it? It was this wasn't
it was a couple months ago.
No, okay.
It was a couple.
I'm gonna have you send
it
that
was
one
in
to
September.
me.
It was in September.
I missed that one then because she's had similar interviews, but they were further back. And so, did she co-author Rogoff's Curse of Cash, or is that a solo effort on his part? I haven't seen.
She didn't write Curse of Cash, but they wrote This Time Is Different, and all the Keynesian academics got all angry with them, and they found one or two flaws, and they tried to discredit the entire book, even though the majority of the book was extremely well researched. But a few guys found a few errors there, and they were trying to discredit the entire thing.
Yeah, they basically went at a tell sheet spread level attack, and I remember that. I think Reinhart maybe doesn't enjoy the battlefield that much. I think she probably would rather just do her economics and not get blood splattered all over. Rogoff, I don't know. I was kind of hoping he was smart, but it worries me that he would take such a weird stance, which I think is just preposterous. I think it's anti-constitutional. I think it's delusional to say that cash is only for bad guys. Right? That's just nuts.
Yeah, I agree. And look what they're doing with India. India is a trial case for this stuff right now. How they're trying to force rural India, which is a cash economy. A lot of the Indian economy is a cash economy. Even the cities. They're trying to force them into digital economy. They're trying to get people to exchange the notes. There's problems with that. Hundreds of people starved. Thousands of businesses can't function. with it. So it's a disaster what they're doing. I don't know what these global elites are trying to do. Maybe it's population control or whatever, but these people, they don't care about reality, I guess, because they have so much political power and the military is maybe protecting them. I want to transition now to something that you have a lot of experience with, and that's campus politics. It's gotten so ridiculous now. I listen to the Tom Woods show, and Jordan Peterson I hear interviews about, and I hear, the social justice warriors and the snowflakes and the microaggression stuff. Did your college campus had a safe room with crayons and stuffed animals the day after Trump won the election?
Well, I wouldn't say my campus did. I think there was a professor or two, maybe. There was a cry-in at Cornell that was public. It was national news, and I looked at those and I just, geez, I got to blame the parents on that. That strikes me as insane. One of the things when I look at stuff like that, the coloring, and some rogue faculty member can invite the students in to color in their office. We can't stop that. Cornell, by policy, didn't have coloring rooms for students. Cornell's been pretty good so far, in my opinion. They've not kowtowed, but they're gonna hit a wall at some point. I actually thought my year in review might hit the wall. And somehow the adults in the world have gone awfully cowardly, and I use that word a lot lately. And the kids are supposed to protest. They're supposed to have boneheaded ideas. They're working through a lot of stuff. We did stupid stuff. You did stupid stuff. They do stupid stuff. And the adults are supposed to sort of guide them through it, right? And so you say, okay, you guys go protest over there. We're listening, and we swear we're listening, but did not do anything extreme. And the problem now is that in the modern era, that the issues look pretty stupid to me. Maybe I don't understand, but they look pretty stupid. And the adults are responding in a way that, in my opinion, is destructive. So I don't blame the students for being nutty. They're always nutty. I blame the adults for handing students bazookas and saying, shoot them off at will, right? This is where it gets kind of crazy, in my opinion.
Now you work in the science department, so the liberal arts department students may be different, but I feel that like a lot of these government schools, when the kids are starting off at young ages, critical thinking and challenging the teacher is not really encouraged. I had a little bit of that at the college level. If I was to challenge the professor on what was in the book, he wouldn't want to do it during class time. Do you think then that society is being socially engineered to think a certain way? Our society, it's kind of ridiculous. We're giving out in a lot of these sports programs, which are good. Sports competition is good because kids have to learn how to function in the economy later and how difficult it is. But giving out last place trophies to everyone just for participation, I don't think that is positive, is a good reward system for incentives.
Yeah, the participation trophies are kind of a metaphor for that, for the coddling that people accuse parents of. And in some sense, my generation responded to the greatest generation, which were really a bunch of hard asses. I mean, they really were. They were rigid and stiff, and they had seen a lot and done a lot and earned the right to be a hard ass. But my generation then responded to them by saying, I'm not going to raise my kid that way. So we raised our kids in a very soft, sort of gentle way. And I think there was this situation where if you don't ever lose, you never learn how to appropriately lose. When I look at, for example, the cry-ins, which is just totally insane to me. But the question I like to rhetorically ask, how many of the kids sitting at that cry-in have played a varsity sport, right? And I bet the answer is anywhere from 0 to 1. And because the varsity sports, or sports of any kind, teach you to lose and to dust yourself off and improve and win the next time, and not to cry. And so in that sense, things like Title IX in sports, which was destructive as hell for men's sports, was fantastically supportive for women's sports. And it took me a number of years to realize that trade-off might have been a good trade. And as I walk past athletic fields and I watch these young women out there smacking the hell out of each other on the athletic field, I think that's fantastic training for them. And I bet you those young women are not the ones with the cry-ins. That's my supposition. Maybe I'll find out to the contrary.
We'll see if they respond in the comment section below this article, if they are the ones at the Cryans. Now, you talk a lot in your 2016 review about conspiracy theorizing. You know, the mainstream media is on a witch hunt now. Kind of reminds me of McCarthyism. And they're calling anyone who has a different viewpoint from them basically fake news, part of this Russian propaganda operative. They've kind of been backtracking from that and kind of apologizing. I have, you know, a handful of my friends were on that list that the Washington Post gave out with 200 websites. They're very angry about it, a lot of them. I mean, some of them are joking about it, but I know behind the scenes a lot of them are really angry about it. Some of them even thought about suing. In your lifetime, did you think that we would get back to this point where we would see, you know, the mainstream media try to just squash anyone else who had a different opinion like a bug?
Well, no, actually. To me, this looks like a temper tantrum by the left that they lost an election to a knuckle-dragging, totally unconventional candidate from, I guess you'd call it the right. But I think
Trump's more of an...
Or who knows, right?
I would just say, Dave, that Trump's an independent. He just used the Republican Party because it was easier for him to take the nomination.
Right. And by the way, one thing I write about is and I actually, it's my favorite section potentially out of, there's 38 sections, so that's quite a statement for me. I write about the things that Trump successfully did that I don't think people noticed, and so I make a number of blasphemous claims. Which including the fact that all along he duped a lot of people and they didn't even know they were being duped. And it started with the Clintons. I think he was able to convince the Clintons that he was best interest. And so then he got put front and center in the Clinton campaign to get a wretched candidate in the forefront for the Republicans. I think he threw the first debate intentionally. And I make a case for why that is. And it's actually very straightforward. You mentioned the conspiracy theory thing. That's a shout-out I do every year. The term conspiracy theory is used pejoratively. Conspiracy theorist is used pejoratively. If someone calls you a conspiracy theorist, they're basically calling you a jerk and an idiot and a putty-headed child, right? And I have this urge to punch him. I'm angry at that particular crowd. Someone calls me a conspiracy theorist, I bark at him very loud. And the reason is because if you got anything from 2016, is that men and women of wealth and power conspire. And they conspire to do all sorts of things. They rig elections, they rig primaries. The primary rigging was just preposterous. And it took this election to show me how crooked primaries are. And so what I do is every year shout out to the notion that you know, quit using that term pejoratively, which there's an irony here. It turns out that the origin of that campaign, the idea of using conspiracy theory as a pejorative and therefore hanging this label on people to make them go away, it turns out it has its origins at the CIA. So you go, oh, Jesus Christ, that's the best of all conspiracy theories. And so it makes me angry because smart people will try to shut down a conversation and make them uncomfortable by using the word conspiracy. You use it on me, I might get violent on you. Probably not, but you're going to get a face full. I'm going to call you an idiot and an ignorant person. You're going to get quite an earful out of me. So.
Yeah, I mean, in 2016, Dave, we've had a lot of conspiracy theories that have now been proven to be conspiracy facts. So we have, you mentioned the political side. Let's talk about the banks. Goldman Sachs was fined $120 million for manipulating interest rates last month. We have Deutsche Bank, which was fined almost $100 million for manipulating the London Gold Fix and the London Silver Fix. They turned over a bunch of evidence with communications to other investment banking traders. They named 8 other co-conspirators. We have the stuff at the Clinton Foundation. You know, I could go on and on and on. There was so much money moved in the Clinton Foundation, the banks basically had to be involved in it. There was no other way.
Had the most colossal fraudulent scheme running, right?
A culture of fraud.
Literally a million cases of fraud.
And
right? Literally a million. Yeah.
I think it was over 2 million. Yeah, it was over 2 million, over 5,000 employees, and the stock price, did it even drop 10%? The stock price just shrugged it off.
So for those who have never read the thing, I actually try to keep it moving, and I try to add humor. There's a lot of snark. There's a lot of sort of bizarre views, bizarre angles on the world. But in that particular case, I said that, when this finally shakes out, the bankers will be upside down, and then I referred to like Mussolini. I think we will eventually get to that point, potentially. It's almost like we have to get to that point. If we don't start hanging some bankers, at least metaphorically, then there will be there will be some sort of response that will be very unpleasant, or we will have succumbed to totalitarianism, in my opinion. It's kind of one of the two.
Yeah, I think we're going totalitarian government in a lot of different countries. Venezuela is totalitarian. They're experiencing hyperinflation now. One of the main reasons Bitcoin is doing so well is because of what's going on in India and Venezuela, and China had a devaluation. So those citizens who had cash in the bank, they're not just going to sit there, even if they're not libertarian or Austrian school, they have some common sense. If you've made some money and run a business, you have at least some common sense. You're not going to sit there and let the government start stealing your savings without trying to do something about it. I mean, maybe if you believe in big government, you're a rich socialist running a business like the Ben and Jerry's guys or something, right? But now you talked on another interview with Chris Martinson, Peak Prosperity. You talked about how for investing, you're not sure what to put your money in. You talked about how you have a good amount of cash. You're holding a good amount of cash. Are you worried about holding a good amount of cash as well? Because look at the rules changes that these politicians and central bankers and other governments have already implemented. It could easily come to the U.S., in the next 4 to 8 years.
Well, I have a lot of cash. I mean, I've 50% of my net worth is in essentially, at most multi-day duration debt, right? It's very short term. In '06, at which point I was on full alert to the possibility of a crisis, although I didn't know exactly how it would play out. It was obvious something was coming. In fact, the first writings of a potential housing crisis date back to the late 90s, where people started to notice housing was getting frothy. By '02, housing was very frothy, and so this notion that it came at the last minute is baloney. So in '06, I actually diversified, not by holdings, which I've been very undiverse for quite a while, but by institutions. So I took accounts that were way too big to be covered by even the theoretical insurance plans of FDIC and things like that. And I just started distributing them across a multitude of institutions on the notion that if they all go down, I'm done, right? But if they all go down, we're all done. So on the notion that I would diversify, and if some bank went insolvent, and I'm at or under the FDIC limit, then maybe I'll be covered. I think the chances are pretty good. And at least it won't take out my entire nest egg. Oh. So I got lots and lots of institutions.
I think now we know the FDIC doesn't have the money to cover all these banks failing. So I think they'll just go back to Congress, and Congress will go hand in hand to the Fed, and they'll print the money to prevent people with pitchforks and bank runs coming like crazy. But it looks like they are starting to prepare with the legislations for potential. They're starting to stop either a potential bank run or try to start bail-ins with this, going to more digital bank accounts and the other rules and legislation. Did you see the Federal Reserve issued a press release 2 weeks ago saying that they were running the numbers and they think that European banks and American banks only need about 70 billion of capital injections, but they don't plan on doing any more bailouts. They want the banks to issue shares, new equity, and also long-term debt instead. So I was wondering who's going to buy the equity and the debt then if the central banks are claiming they're not going to buy it.
There is no one to buy the debt, right? That's ridiculous. So the Italian banking system supposedly got a slug of bailout with private money. And I'm 100% confident that if you trace that private money, it ultimately traces to public sources, right? Private money, this is not money that already exists. This someone's taken out a loan that ultimately stems from a central bank to buy this private debt because the central banks are saying, we've got your back. So they're making it sound private because it's more palatable, but it's not private.
Yeah. So they'll say that in the press release. They'll say one thing, and the truth will be exactly the opposite. But yeah, there are pools of capital that they can force people for national security purposes. They can go after, say, 1% of your 401k or your IRA, and for national security purposes, they can say, oh, you have to buy U.S. Treasuries. So everyone has to put 1% of their IRA or 401k into U.S. Treasuries or into U.S. bank stocks, or if you're European, into either like Deutsche Bank shares or something else. They can potentially do that. Some people would go along and some people would get upset, but that's the government. They have the guns.
This is why you buy physical
so
gold, right? I've been buying gold since '99,
hmm
with about a decade hiatus while I had what I perceived was enough. And then in 2015, I started buying again. And then in 2016, I bought aggressively enough to, I upped my gold. My total percentage of my assets in gold rose 5% due to very aggressive buying in the gold market. So I do have a lot of gold, and if they really do get to those extremes, I might not be whole, but I'm not going to be devastated either, and I'm pretty sure that I'll be the one-eyed man in the land of the blind. So it's a barbell strategy. You hedge with cash on one end and with gold on the other, and hope like hell to keep some of it.
Yeah, I think it's a good prudent strategy for our listeners out there to have a good portion of cash, maybe diversified in either your brokerage account, some outside the banking system, some in a couple different banks, to spread it around that way. And then also, physical gold and silver. I like the gold and silver companies as well because that gives you additional diversification into gold and silver. The problem is a lot of these gold and silver companies are extremely poorly run. So if we have the paper gold and silver price, manipulated down, then some of these ones can go bankrupt. So you have to be really careful which gold and silver companies you buy then. But that's in addition to physical.
I've never been a big fan of the miners. And the fact that gold got to 1900 and they still couldn't seem to make any money told me that it's just a lousy business. So I do own miners. I bought them years and years ago, but I own them with only half-heartedly, and so as I got interested in gold again, even though they say the miners are a nice leverage play on gold, I said screw that. I'm not buying any more miners. I can't buy a company because it's a leverage play on something. I want to buy a company that's going to make money. And gold miners have proven to me that they're not going to make money. I don't know what. If they start making money, it means gold will run so high that I'll already be wealthy because of my gold position. So I don't need to leverage up with Ponzi scheme mining companies. So I'm not a big fan of them. And they did well this year, so I missed an opportunity, but I don't care. So.
Yeah, they did do extremely well. They were one of the top performing sectors until the last couple months. Really, the correction started in September. I think a lot of it was manipulation, but we have a strong dollar and the dollar index for a lot of different reasons as well. The dollar getting too strong, that could do a lot of damage to the global economy as well. So the dollar gets too weak, it could do a lot of damage. Dollar gets too strong, it could do a lot of damage as well. And, right now we have a strong dollar that could do a lot of damage to a lot of different entities.
Well, the amazing thing about gold actually is, and this is where gold buyers and gold holders should take heart, is that gold has done really well this year, right into the teeth of a strong dollar. And so to the extent that there is some correlation between the strength of the dollar and gold, if we can do as well as we did this year on our gold, and while the dollar's ripping to the high side, then I got to figure when it finally turns around, gold ought to do pretty well, right? So I'm comfortable owning a lot of gold right now. I'm very comfortable.
Dave, I think what this also means is that a lot of people are in that barbell strategy, like you said. So at least a good chunk of their portfolio, they have cash and they have gold. Because they can't tell if it's inflation or deflation. They don't see the world the way you or I do, but they see that something is definitely wrong, and they say, well, I have some cash and I have some gold in addition to my other investments, and I feel better at least owning a chunk of those two different
well, so you can say a lot of people. I think the problem that you and I suffer from is the echo chamber, and that is we hang around and chat with people who pay attention to this stuff. So it feels like a lot of people, but I see various numbers about percentages of gold and gold equity ownership by the average person, and they're almost without fail below 1%. The historical norm by conventional wisdom is 5%. So gold and gold equities are profoundly underowned across the board. You might have a David Einhorn or a Kyle Bass buying gold aggressively, both of which are pretty strongly enthusiastic. But Joe's six-pack hasn't even begun to wrap their brain around gold as an investment based on the numbers. I think there's a huge upside if it normalizes. Maybe it never will. Maybe it's like normalizing buggy whips. But I'm willing. By the way, there's a great Larry Lindsay interview on King World News where he basically says, through the centuries we go between paper and gold and paper and gold, and he says, and we're due for gold again.
Yeah, he worked at the Federal Reserve. His audiobook is available on Audible, fully unabridged. I haven't listened to it yet. It's in my wish list. I'm going to get around to it soon.
It's not on my radar. You remember the title of Larry's book?
I can look it up for you. Give me like 10.
I'll get it later. Yeah, we sent like a couple of wingnuts.
Okay, well in wrapping up this interview, Dave, what are some of your ideas for 2017? Do you think then that what probability then would you say that we have a major crisis in 2017? Do you think it's increased in the last couple of years, or do you think it's about the same?
It depends on how you define a major crisis. So if a recession is a major crisis, and they're variables, shapes and sizes, right? They have different kinds. So, for example, the recession after the dot-com bubble was pretty minor because the banks were not deeply invested in the dot-com. They weren't carrying them on their books. Whereas the 07 to 09 period was a disaster because the banks were at the heart of the thing. And so the question then becomes we will have another recession. The probability of a recession in any given year is something like 1 in 8, right? Or 1 in 7. And so just flipping a coin, right, just any randomly chosen year, you got about a 15% chance of a recession. And since we've been in a what we'll call a recession-free environment, which it's the market, the economy's been laboring, but there's been no blowout. I now define a recession not just as negative growth, but where the system purges, right? That's the recession that we all know and are from the kind that even idiots at the Fed recognize as a recession. And we're overdue now. Just the clock has been ticking. It's very long in the tooth. It's like driving towards a street light that you can see way ahead has been green the whole way. You can maybe make it through, and it'll stay green, but it's a stale green light. Now I think the economy's stale. And the next recession will not be 7 years from now. It might take 2 years, which will be a pain in the ass, but nevertheless. But when it comes, the question is, what kind of bodies are going to float to the surface? My suspicion is this next one's got to be a nasty one because they've put more garbage in the system. More corporate debt has to be written down than ever before. I think there's going to be a real projectile vomit. And what are the odds in 2017? I don't know, 1 out of 2. I don't think we get past 2 years without one, so I'll give it 50%.
Yeah, normally now since 1971, since the dollar was taken off the last vestiges of a gold standard, we've been having, with increased central bank intervention, we've been having major financial crises every 7 to 12 years. Last one was in 2008. So if we gave it 12 years, maybe 2020 at the latest then. I don't think we get to 2020 without a major crisis. But, who knows what it's going to look like. I do see more totalitarian government and people in power wanting more and more control because it seems to me they blame a lot of the stuff on capitalism, but we don't have capitalism now. But they blame it on capitalism anyway so they can get more power and say, even though they made the mess in the first place, a lot of cases, I think, it was large corporations and the Federal Reserve and many politicians making a lot of mistakes that caused a lot of the crises, but they don't take any of the blame for any of the problems they caused.
There's a guy on Twitter named the Euchre. I have no idea who he is. At one point, I was gonna quote him, and I asked him if he wanted more credit than just the Euchre, and he said no. But he said something that I hadn't thought of, and that is he seems to think that maybe the Fed motivation is not to avoid a recession. Sometimes the Fed governors will actually state that we want to avoid a recession. I'm going, but you can't. Right? That's like avoiding winter. It's coming, right? You can't. You can possibly diddle around the edges with when and how bad, but you're going to get it. And the Euchre said, he said, I think the Fed's policy now is aimed at keeping the equity markets and the asset markets elevated through the recession. And I'm thinking, oh, that's a really interesting idea. Maybe their ideas are going to mitigate the pain of the recession by trying to keep assets elevated. I think that will fail miserably, but it is this passing thought. I really had to entertain that idea seriously. And so I found Lindsay's book, by the way.
Yeah, I emailed you the link as well. Keynes actually thought he could defeat the business cycle. That's one of the reasons he could come up with counter-cyclic policy and defeat the business cycle. So that's probably why the academics
attenuate it. I don't think Keynes believed any of the crap that they're getting now. Now I even present a Keynesian economics I could live by. So here we go, in a nutshell. If the government acted as a financial interested entity, and I don't mean slovenly, greedy bribery garbage. I'm just saying here's an organization that tries to optimize its use of money, right? And so if the government bought services, built bridges, did things when they were cheap to do, when labor was cheap, when goods were cheap, when materials were cheap, and then stopped when the private sector bid them up, it would be the best bang for the buck for our tax dollars, and it would be naturally counter-cyclical. The problem is these clowns decide, no, it's not just about getting the best bang for the buck. We have to stimulate things. And the minute the word stimulate comes out, it's just pay-to-play garbage. It's just cronyism of a higher order. So they got to quit thinking stimulus, and they ought to just start thinking about when things are cheap, buy them, and when they're expensive, stop. But that's how governments work. They suck. And that's why Trump is an interesting president.
Well, I don't think government should be involved in that
type
of economic planning.
But
I mean, large-scale economic
planning. If they did the things they got to do, like build bridges, when it was cheap to do it, it doesn't require planning. It would naturally self-plan. And that's a kind of a Keynesianism I can sign up on. Right? If they do the expensive stuff when things are not very expensive, then you get the most for your money.
Well, the government's not very good at doing that. Really, there's very few examples.
I'll see a unicorn before I see that. So.
Yeah, I mean, look at all the trillions of over $19 trillion we know from the one-time partial audit of the Federal Reserve that Ron Paul got when he was still in Congress was given out to foreign central banks, corporations, the European Union to prop up European banks and European governments. And so a lot of that money, instead of propping up the banks, it could have went to infrastructure and other investments. So that money was wasted down a black hole to maintain the status quo. So, I mean, it seems that they don't really care a lot about the people on Main Street and fixing things, that, you know, the elites, they're going to do what they have to do to keep the bankers in power and keep the derivatives market from collapsing. They'll print the trillions however they can. It's not going to be the normal way that they've done in the past by announcing, oh, we're doing this quantitative easing program, because now a lot of people know what it means. My research and talking with my sources, that it's basically gone backdoor and covert. So they're calling these money printing programs and liquidity programs and bailouts, they're more covert now, and there's new names for them like currency swaps, which, you know, I spoke to people on Wall Street about currency swaps, and what they're telling me is, you know, in the past, these things had to be paid back immediately. They were for small amounts. They were short-term loans. That's what currency swaps used to be. Yeah. That's not what they are anymore. They're now based, yeah, so now they're in the trillions or tens of trillions amounts, and central banks don't, because they're not audited, central banks don't have to be audited properly by anyone independent. They don't even carry currency swaps on their accounting books.
Yeah, and they're so arcane to the average person, they don't even know what's going on. And so, I don't.
Oh yeah.
I don't really understand.
I know people in.
I could lip sync a description, but it would not in any way involve deep understanding. There's a lot I don't understand. You know,
I'll tell you
these SDRs. I don't understand. There's a lot of stuff that And probably the things I think I understand, I don't either. So it's just that simple.
I'll tell you what it is. I've worked on explaining it very simply to people off air. There's actually different levels of currency swap. So a bank can do a smaller currency swap with hedging for foreign exchange transactions for a corporation, but at the central bank level, it's different from central bank to central bank. Okay, well, Dave, I really enjoy these conversations. I'm going to put links in there to your Zero Hedge article with your report and also on Pink Prosperity. Thank you again for your time. And if our listeners want to contact you about your work, how do they do so?
Emails. People reach out to me all the time. That's you can find almost anywhere. I'm at Cornell in chemistry, so it's an easy one. If you can't find my email address knowing my name and where I work, I probably don't want to hear from you. And then I'm also on Twitter at David B. Collum, just one word, right? And occasionally my stuff shows up at Zero Hedge, but that's not communicating with me, so it's irrelevant. So, in any case, yeah. So, hey, I'm thrilled to be here. This was fun.
Well, I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And, 2016 was a very interesting year. I wouldn't say it was a great year for me. Hopefully 2017 will be better. I think, unfortunately, it's going to get more confusing and weird, judging by, the stuff that's coming out of mainstream media and the politicians.
Looking for a better year than 16. That was a pain in the neck.
Hi, everyone. It's Jason Bierek of Wall Street from Main Street. Thanks again for tuning into our podcast and for helping us get over 2 million views on our YouTube channel and over 10,000 iTunes downloads per month. We have a special offer for our Wall Street for Main Street listeners that has proven to be a good investment based on plenty of 5-star reviews from satisfied customers and independent fashion bloggers. Mo and I recently tried some shoes from a new company which is run by a family of third-generation shoemakers called Grant Stone Shoes. These are classic Goodyear Welt shoes using full-grain leathers from world-renowned tanneries. In a world filled with disposable products, it can be difficult to find items which can be used for years and later passed down to the next generation. Grant Stone is a smaller brand going direct to the consumer, which offers unprecedented value. Quality and fit is the cornerstone of their program, and the customer response and reviews confirm this. These are high-quality shoes at a good price for the busy professional who wants to improve their appearance at the office, in the boardroom, or out on the town with your girlfriend or wife. Or, if you're single like me, you know you will look good with these shoes on and maybe impress the ladies with your style and taste. But, if the ladies love Obama or Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders and hate free markets or capitalism or entrepreneurs, at least I will look and feel good in my comfy Grant Stone shoes. Mo and I have worked out a special offer for our listeners. So when you go to grantstoneshoes.com, enter the code GOLD, that's GOLD, for 10% off any purchase. That's grantstoneshoes.com and enter promo code GOLD.